All right, so my name is Wilbur Alderjust, and I'm with Naira Foster, and the topic of our presentation is freedom of speech in cyberspace. So to delve to delve into the topic of freedom of speech in cyberspace, we first need to understand what freedom of speech is. So, what is freedom of speech? Freedom of speech in the United States allows both citizens and non-citizens of a country to freely express themselves. And freedom of speech is also protected by the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution. Specifically, the First Amendment states Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievance. Um, there has also been revisions to the constitutions that have clarified what is considered free speech. Freedom of speech includes the right to use certain offensive words and phrases to convey political messages, to engage in symbolic speech. An example would be the burning of the flag in protests. Um, it may be um, a derogatory thing to do, but freedom of speech allows one to burn the flag in protest. Freedom of speech also includes the right to contribute money to political campaigns and the right not to speak at all. But freedom of speech does not protect you from all forms of speech. Freedom of speech does not protect you from inciting actions that would harm others. An example would be shouting bomb on a plane. Freedom of speech does not protect you from making or distributing obscene material. And freedom of speech does not protect you from burning draft cards as an anti-war protest. So, what is freedom of speech in cyberspace? Freedom of speech when it comes to cyberspace is the freedom of expression by communication through computer networks. This form of expression can be in the form of creating a blog or an article or expressing oneself in a comment section of an article or video by the creation of a video which expresses the creator's view of various subjects, among other things. And most forms of speech is protected. Most forms of speech that is protected by the First Amendment carries over to cyberspace. So, why is freedom of speech in cyberspace so important? Freedom of speech allows one's word to be heard by a broad audience. The audience includes anyone with internet connection. Um, Freedom of speech has allowed social media to thrive. No longer must a person be in front of a camera to reach a lot of people, and people can share their feelings about nearly any subject. Um, and social media has led to social movements like the Me Too movement, which has given those who have been affected by sexual harassment the bravery to come forward about their personal experiences. But freedom of speech in cyberspace, much like in the real world, has its limitations. There was a case where a man by the name of Anthony Alonis posted threatening comments on his Facebook page. And because of the various threats made to his wife and to a local school, he was convicted of a federal offense and sentenced to 3 years in prison. So, in certain instances, they hold comments said in cyberspace to the same standards as in real world situations. The law has attempted to define freedom of speech in cyberspace. The first prominent attempt of the government to define freedom of speech was the Communications Decency Act of 1996, which was to censor indecent and obscene speech to persons under the age of 18. The problem was that the definition of this indecent speech was very broad and threatened many aspects of speech, which was protected by the First Amendment. So the indecent speech portion of the law was overturned. So the definition of freedom of speech has not yet been clearly outlined in cyberspace as it has in other aspects of life. The main reason is because cyberspace is a fairly new thing to society. Another thing that I want to add is that the First Amendment does not protect you or the First Amendment does protect you from the government attempting to deny your speech, um, but you still do not have the right to say whatever and to whomever you want without any consequences. For example, a private company can terminate you if you say something deemed inappropriate, even something said or posted through cyberspace. But if your boss is a government or works for the government, then you may have a claim to your First Amendment rights.
When you think about how the freedom of speech relates to the engineering process, you think about how engineers have the ability to develop technologies that can facilitate or suppress freedom of speech in a cyber world, how their creations can affect people's abilities to exercise the First Amendment right. As of this year, 51% of the world's populations have access to the internet. With this, we no longer require offices, bars, homes, coffee shops to keep in touch with other people. We can do it right from where we are. We can share opinions and connect with people all over the globe, and that's all due to the creation of the internet. The internet as a global system of interconnected computer network changed the world and how we relate to each other. The internet is what allows freedom of speech in cyberspace to exist, and it first started with a record description of social interactions, series of memos written by JCR of MIT in August of 1962, discussing his galactic network concept. But there are more develops in the technology world that promotes the freedom of speech, such as the early email, private message boards, the social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, where users can quickly share their opinions to a network of friends. The creation of encryption messages app, and also the rise of the independent media and its potential to be a new point of view. All these technologies combined with many more made it easy for us to express our opinions. But they were also developing a technology world that suppressed the freedom of speech. Their goal is to obtain control, like developers' abilities to mute or hide or not allow comments on a website. They also can change information, manipulate news, and sometimes even fabricate it to change a mindset of a particular group. An example being the 2016 presidential election, where it was discovered that fake Russian Facebook accounts bought more than $100,000 worth of political ads. Authorities can also use technologies to suppress the freedom of speech. For example, the CIA of the government spying on citizens with the potential intention of persecution based on the type of language, or even the government of the CIA collecting private data of citizens without their knowledge or consent. You also have business that are specialized in creating software that promotes cyber attack in people that they want to silence. Companies that will collect data of someone and later on use against that person. So, as engineers, we know that we have the ability to create technologies that will either help to promote the freedom of speech, and we can also develop technologies and use the technology to suppress the freedom of speech. So, we come to this debate: what is legal versus what is ethical? As engineers, we have to follow and promote the Constitution. That means supporting the First Amendment right. As technology becomes more political, it is necessary that technologists recognize the role they play in society through the products they build. Schools and universities need to educate the engineers of tomorrow on the matters of ethics and society and equip them with the right tools to determine the global human rights impact of the technologies they develop. And they have to make sure that their creations serve the society as a whole and not only the richest and the most powerful. Another interesting debate is that should the government or the CIA and engineers have the ability to spy on the behalf of the security of the nation? Um, Specialized agencies should be able to do surveillance, but with oversight and public knowledge to avoid abuse of power. Every citizen should obey and be submitted to the same rules and regulations to avoid discrimination of certain groups. The truth of the matter is that surveillance can be used to combat real threats, such as school shootings, terrorist attacks, and their networks of communication, hate websites and subsequent attacks, government data breach at a state and federal level, and all sorts of cybercrime. When it comes to preserve the freedom of speech in a cyberspace, there are some obstacles that we encounter. The main ones being the future revisions of the law and the interpretation of the law, and important questions that should be raised, such as should freedom of speech be absolute, and finding the balance between conflicting freedoms and different opinions of what freedom constitutes and the freedom of speech constitute. Should freedom of speech be allowed even when you're propagating hate speech? So, as we evolve in a society, all these questions should be constantly raised and debated. A recent case that opened up the debate about the consequences of freedom of speech in the cyber world happened with Justine Sacco, who was a senior director of communications at IAC. She tweeted a racist joke on a flight going to Cape Town. Um, and she turned off her phone. And by the time her flight had landed and she turned on her phone, she realized that she had been terminated from her position. What Saku didn't realize is that people had retweeted her tweet, and by the time her flight landed, people from the company where she worked from had access to the information that she tweeted, and because of that, she got fired. Even though she has the First Amendment right to express her opinions, private companies can still terminate employees if they feel like their personal opinions are going to harm the image of the company. To finalize our presentation, I want to leave you with some resources to learn more about freedom of speech. There's some books like Virtual Freedom, Net Neutrality, and Free Speech in the Internet by Don Luziato. Another book is The Cyber Rights, Defending the Freedom of Speech in a Digital Age by Goldwyn Mike. There's also videos available on YouTube that you can access to learn more, like one from ACLU, from our Harvard Summit, um, a more in-depth discussion about freedom of speech. And there's also another video, Freedom of Speech, Crash Course, Government and Politics, very introductory level discussion. And there's also websites, communities such as the Bill of Rights, the American Civil Liberties Union, and the United States courts websites. They all provide information, documentation about freedom of speech and freedom of speech in the internet. Um, Here are some references that William and I used to put this presentation together. Some of the, most of them are links to websites that we took information from, and they're all available. And I wanted to thank you, everybody who watched this presentation, and wish everybody a good semester.